Hello, friends, and welcome to Impact Everywhere, a podcast that focuses on people having a positive impact in unexpected places. My name is Benjamin Von Wong, and I'm excited to introduce to you our guest today, Gary Bolles, the Chair for the Future of Work at Singularity University. For those of you who don't know what Singularity University is, it's actually not a university, but rather a global learning and innovation community that wants to use exponential technologies to tackle the world's biggest challenges. And Gary is helping that community peer into the future to ensure that they stay relevant in a constantly changing world. Amongst his many achievements, he also has a bunch of courses on LinkedIn with over 300,000 students exploring topics like learning agility, the new rules of work, and how to develop your future workforce. Gary and I met thanks to an introduction from a mutual friend called Peter Sims, and during our first coffee hangout, got the opportunity to meet his wife and business partner, Heidi Kleinmaus. Our first conversation, which revolved around the topics of creativity and the role that it played in tackling the world's greatest problems, was so fascinating that we decided to stay in touch. Fast forward to today, with global markets completely disrupted, I wanted to know if his thoughts had changed and what wisdom he might be able to share with this community, especially for those like me whose lives have been completely disrupted and are looking to figure out how to position themselves for the next decade. Whether you're a business leader or a student trying to figure out what happens next, this episode is one that I think you'll get a ton of value out of. And without further ado, this is Gary Bolles, and here he is talking about COVID-19 and what to expect in the near future.
The reason I call this period the Great Reset is it occurred to me when we've gone through these kinds of shifts in the past, they normally sort of group into three phases. There's a falling off the cliff phase. There's a sort of riffling along the bottom and trying to figure out how you start to head back up phase. And then there's a phase of what we'll eventually call a new normal. I call the first one survive, the second phase revive, and the third phase thrive. Now, what's happened in prior periods like this, which we often call recessions, especially the Great Recession, we have gone through these similar phases, but they've been spread out over years. Suddenly we compressed the time frame and we made it weeks, not even months, weeks. And in 10 weeks, the US went from 3.5% unemployment to, depending upon whose number you listen to, 15 to 20% unemployment. That first survive phase, nobody's thinking about tomorrow very much. It's just, how do you keep the lights on? But as we shift into this period of still uncertain, but now at least we're starting to follow new rules, then what you find is that people start to lift their heads up. So I think that during that survive phase, it certainly was a chance for introspection. I hope one of the memos we all took away is that that's a really useful exercise. We should do it pretty regularly. What we see now, and this was true before the virus, organizations are starting to adopt the mentality of either it's right in front of me and I can see it and the fog down the highway hasn't started to thicken yet. So for some companies, that's a quarter, and for some, that's a year. But then there's this really thick fog, but there's a mountain in the distance, and I can focus on that. And that's 5 years, that's 10 years. Now, my friend John Hagel at Deloitte Center for the Edge, he calls that zoom out, zoom in. When you're thinking about the long-term vision of what you want to accomplish as an organization or what you want to accomplish as an individual, you have to have some sort of longitudinal aspiration. There's some North Star or Southern Cross that you're guiding yourself for. And that helps to calibrate a lot of people that are hopefully on the journey with you to all share that vision of where you want to go. Now, my friend Charlene Lee calls that your future customer because in 10 years, you're probably going to have a very different customer. If it's for your own career, then that can be what we used to call career paths and what today I call a portfolio of work. That can be some type of vision for the kinds of things that you want to be doing today, tomorrow, in a constantly shifting landscape. And you want to continually optimize towards what you feel the ultimate goal is. My father was fond of saying that the first deliverable with people is hope. You have to hope that you have the capacity to be able to take a step and have something good happen from it. Because if you don't, then you're going to be paralyzed. And even worse, you might do a lot of behaviors that are kind of against your own best interests.
I think that's exactly the problem that we're seeing, though, right now. is that some people might be starting to lose hope, especially since COVID-19 doesn't really feel like it's going anywhere anytime soon, right? And while John Hagel's principle of zooming in and zooming out is amazing, after all, perspective just really helps us to navigate through tough times, I feel like not everyone has the privilege or confidence necessary to deal with this period of unknown and uncertainty. What do you think people can do in order to take control of their hope?
So I call this agency. What I think is important is that each of us feels like we have the mindset and the skill set to take action. For the skill set, I say there's sort of four what are called transferable skills. Unfortunately, we often label soft skills, but there are four skills that we want to kind of develop to help us to be able to have agency. And that includes being a problem solver, being adaptive, being creative, and having empathy. So what do I point to these for? Well, problem solver, one of the things that my father realized is if you sort of boil it all down, why does somebody hire us? Why do we hire somebody to do work for us? It's to solve problems. So if you approach a potential employer or hirer as a problem solver, I understand the problems you are trying to solve for your customers or other stakeholders. I know how to solve those problems. I've got skills. I've demonstrated those skills in these previous situations that I've been in, and I can solve your problems for you. If you present yourself as a problem solver, you're far more likely to get hired. So problem solving, we're all trial and error machines. We don't call it trial and success. We call it trial and error. And that's how we sort of understand how to use our own skills. Adaptive, because the world's going to continue to change. We used to think, oh, we're going to have to eventually learn how to work from home. And then suddenly a virus comes along and now we're doing it within a matter of weeks. And so adaptive is a core skill set. And there's a lot of people that don't necessarily have that mindset of being adaptive. Creative. So creative is what keeps us ahead of the robots and software. And then finally with empathy. If you don't have empathy for your customer, you don't have empathy for your teammates, you don't have empathy for other stakeholders, then that's also what differentiates us from the robots and software. So it just so happens in English that says PACE, problem solvers who are adaptive, creative, and with empathy. And I talk a lot about the pace of change and the spread of change. How can you develop these skills? How can you feel that you have agency? How can you start to think about a farther horizon that's that mountain in the distance or that North Star or Southern Cross that can help to guide directionally? It's not a roadmap. It's not a specific set of steps you must follow for the next 10 years, although if you like doing that, that's fine. But life happens. And so if you had planned a career path back in January 2020, and then along came a virus, I'm going to guess you have to be adaptive and sort of rethink that a little bit.
Okay, that's a wonderful framework and acronym. PACE, P-A-C-E. Definitely going to remember that one. It actually makes me feel good because when I think about my own life, I feel like I have most of those elements of pace. However, I feel like even if you have those elements, it doesn't really help you find clarity in terms of which direction to go. You've referred back to the mountain a couple of times, and I'm curious, how do people find their purpose in life? And isn't that purpose something that is constantly changing anyways? Like, how are people supposed to set goals and milestones when things are constantly shifting under their feet?
So to me, you just said two different things that are very complementary, but I think about them as separate issues. So there's what that long-term set of goals might be, and there's purpose. So the long-term set of goals, you could have no sense whatsoever what your purpose in life is. But you can feel that there are things in the world that you want to do. You can feel that there's some level of achievement that you want in your life. You can feel there's some amount of money you want to be able to make. Those are all aspirations that might have nothing to do with having found your purpose. So that's possible without that sniff test, right? So now let's talk about purpose. What happens for many people is they're looking for motivation. They're looking for the things that drive them. They're trying to understand their own values, not just their beliefs, but the beliefs they put into action, which are values. And they're trying to put all that together into some kind of scenario or understanding of how they show up in the world. And part of the way we show up in the world we call work. And for many people, what they want is to have some sense of why they work, how they work, What's the motivation? What are the values they bring to work? What are the things, the sniff test they need to have in any of the work that they do that motivates them? Now, I call that a spectrum of purpose because it turns out there are people for whom simply getting a paycheck, feeding your family, and putting a roof over their heads is purpose. The challenge is that in a world of constant change, it's increasingly difficult to tell somebody the work you love today that you did yesterday and you want to do tomorrow, I can't guarantee it's going to be there. So instead I say, well, it's a spectrum from something, a topic, an issue, a field, a job you could care less about. But then you're exposed to information about something, or you meet someone, or you're inspired by a particular person's work. And now that kind of work or that arena is kind of interesting to you, and you keep on going. And now it's actually something you might think of as a hobby, or it's something you spend a lot of time on. And then eventually, now it's actually a vocation. You're really enjoying it. You really like doing it as work. And some people, again, stop there. But now you might keep going. And now it's something that's more around meaning. That is, it has deeper meaning to you. And then eventually, if you were to keep going, you might feel that it actually is your purpose. It's your reason for being here on the planet. It's why you show up in the world in the first place. The challenge with purpose-driven rhetoric and labeling is that it can disempower some people because it sets a very high bar. And there are cultures in the world where having a purpose beyond simply your contribution to society as a worker is actually anathema. It's not, we don't talk about that. That's not, we don't think about that. No. Just showing up for work. That's your purpose. There are other cultures where it's perfectly acceptable and you can feel that you have that aspiration. So it's really important for every individual to determine where do they want to be on that spectrum. Is it important to feel that you are trying to crack the code on what you think your purpose in life might be? Well, if that's true, then what I'd urge you to do is to not set too high expectations for that, as in like you have one purpose. Like there's only one reason that you're here. I think you actually have a portfolio of purpose. I think there's a range of different things you can do to have your values show up in the work that you do and the way that you have an impact in the world. But don't try to necessarily lock it into one purpose that stays the same for the rest of your life. If that happens to you, that's awesome. But for many people, that's not actually the goal. It's to continually iterate that purpose so you feel that you have agency and you're solving something that you feel is important to solve.
Man, I think this idea of a spectrum of purpose is really, really powerful. When we talk about financial portfolios, we talk about trying to diversify risk. We're trying to make sure that we have our fingers in as many pots as possible so that regardless of what happens, we can still sustain ourselves. In the same way, I love that you might want to think about having a portfolio of purpose in many different fields, from family to work to society to the planet, because it's always good to have a balanced portfolio. Thinking about it this way, the ones with an unbalanced portfolio are actually often the ones that are unhappiest because they're missing out on friendship or family or money, and that unbalance is really the dangerous thing. I'm curious though, what about people in the world that want to do more good but don't feel confident in the how? These days, there's an overwhelming feeling of I should be doing more with all the social activism going on in the world and all the big, scary systemic problems that exist. Yet some people might look at their portfolio of skills and say, there's a gap between what I want to do and what I feel like I can do. Do you have any advice on how to close the gap between those two?
There's one framing that seems to resonate with people around the world. So when you first start working in the world, there's sort of one deliverable, and that's to get paid. And the first job that I had out of high school was basically taking a big pile of paper, splitting it into two piles of paper, and faxing one pile of paper. My first goal when I escaped high school was I just got to make money. But then after a while, what you find out is that if you're good at something, you get paid better. If you're crappy at something, you don't get paid so well. So maybe you better get good at something. So what I found over time, this was in the mid to late 70s, what I found I was good at was this thing called a computer. And so I would go to a temp agency and I would say, give me the hardest thing you have to do with computers. And they would say, well, there's this software that nobody knows how to use. And I would go in, I'd read the manual, and in the afternoon, I'd train them how to use it. So I figured out I picked up software pretty quickly. So I actually started to get paid better. So that's the first two steps. Got to get paid, but then if you're doing something you're good at, then you're going to make more money. Now, a lot of people stop there. But what my father found, my father was a recovering minister who got laid off from Grace Cathedral here in San Francisco in the late 60s. And he eventually found a job helping other ministers on college campuses, and they were getting laid off. So he went to go write a pamphlet for them, which turned into a book called What Color is Your Parachute? And that became the world's career manual. And so that's one of the odd jobs I had, was I actually fell into the family business. I was trained at the age of 19 as a career counselor. And one of the things my father cracked the code on is, if you are actually doing work that you love, you're using skills that you love, you're solving problems that you love, you're helping people that you love, something that drives your affinity for a type of work or a certain skill or a certain problem, that you actually can get greater fulfillment. So now you got to get paid for it. You got to get good at it. You've got to love doing it. Well, you don't have to love doing it. A lot of people don't feel that's the goal, but we found people are better at work they love doing. And again, some people stop there, but some people feel like there's another step beyond that. And that's, what does the world need? So if it's what you get paid for, what you do well, what you love doing, and what the world needs, in Japan, that's called ikigai. And as a matter of fact, in Dan Buettner's book, Blue Zones, he talks to people in Okinawa who follow the precepts of ikigai, and they're the longest lived people in the world. As a matter of fact, they believe that a life is not a life well lived unless you are practicing ikigai. And you have these 4 aspects of work in your work. And so when you talk about purpose, for a lot of people, well, that's actually, purpose could simply be finding something that you are good at. It might be finding something you also love doing. But for many, and especially for young people coming out of high school or college nowadays, it's what does the world need? So young people have flipped the stack. The old rules of work were to work your way up that ladder from what you can get paid for to what the world needs. And many people would say, oh, I'm not going to do what the world needs until I retire, and then I'll donate money, right? Or I'll volunteer or something. Young people come out of high school or college and they say, what does the world need? If I can do that, I'm going to love what I'm doing. If I love what I'm doing, I'm going to get better and better at it. And if I get better and better at it, I'll eventually get paid well for it. So by flipping that stack, what ends up happening is you find people have greater satisfaction in what they're doing. The challenge is, because you're not focusing on getting paid well for something, it can be a luxury to some. And so that's what I often tell people, why purpose needs to be self-defined, because if you just lost your job, if you lost your home, you're going to fall back down Maslow's hierarchy to the bottom rung, then you've just got to make money. And everything else I've talked about might be a luxury for a period of time. But if you're young and you don't need to make as much money, you can be purpose-driven and you can fill in the rest of the ikigai stack, hopefully pretty quickly.
Nice. That's great. Something interesting about ikigai that I discovered firsthand is that just because you find it doesn't mean you get to hold on to it, right? The world is constantly changing. And so what you can get paid for and what the world needs might move on with or without you if you don't keep up, which really sucks. I mean, I'm sure there are people listening to this podcast who had everything figured out and then boom, pandemic. And now you suddenly have to redefine how you fit into this brand new world. It's kind of where I'm at right now, trying to rediscover who I am without my story. Because what I'm good at, what I can get paid for, and what I love are no longer possible under the current conditions. And in many ways, though, I feel privileged because the creative freelance lifestyle means going through these kinds of resets. So having lots of jobs one year, perhaps, to no jobs the next is actually something that happens to me on a fairly regular basis. But that being said, how do you recommend people take this unique opportunity to recalibrate themselves? How should they position or prepare themselves for that dream job or opportunity that they really, really want?
My father sort of broke this down into 3 steps: what, where, and how. And he used the analogy of a cart, a horse, and a road. So the what is you. You have a unique mix of skills and other attributes. You're optimized for certain kinds of problems to solve. I often say when we're born, nobody gives you the user manual of you. So you have to go through your trial and error machine to figure out the kinds of problems you like to solve. Where do you want to do your work in terms of geography, in terms of the work environment? Why do you do your work? What's the meaning of your work? How do you want to be compensated for your work? When do you want to do your work? How do you have work-life balance? And what's the path that we were talking about? How do you want to do your work, your values and your priorities? And then finally, who? Who are the people you want to work with in the culture? So what, where, when, why, and how. It just so happens that those were the 6 attributes that Aristotle used to determine if a moral act could be done. You would use that as a sniff test. If you could answer the what, where, when, why, how, and who of any act you would take, you could determine, is this the right thing to do? Well, it just so happens when it comes to our work, we need to answer the same things. So that's the what of you. What unique skills, attributes, what do you love to use? What skills do you love to use? What kinds of problems do you love to solve? That's the cart. But a cart just sitting by itself has nowhere to go. So you got to hook it up to a horse. The horse is where? Like, where in the world could you use those skills? And so those are scenarios, a range of different work options, portfolio, if you will, of different places your skills could show up. And that might be one job, or it might be a range of different activities that you would do. And then there's the how, which is the mechanics. That's the road, like how to get there. So the whole idea of that 3-step process is you got to first do self-inventory. You got to kind of know your skills. Because if you can't articulate your skills, no potential hirer or employer is going to tell you to do that. So you got to know, you were talking about how am I without my past story? You've got to come up with a new story. You've got to be able to articulate that. And that can be an iterative process you can do alone, or you can do it with others. And then it's the mechanics, like how do you build that network? How do you find yourself in the world? And so if it's just finding a job, well, then there's a whole bunch of techniques that you can follow that are all around creative job hunting. Use your network to be able to find organizations to target, to be able to find people within the organization to target, to learn more about, to do informational interviewing, to understand the problems that they need solved, to be able to translate your ability to solve problems into the problems that they have. And then to either find work that already exists, there's already a job opening for it, you just might not have known, or to create it. That is, you've been able to articulate problems that they have in a way you could solve it in ways they hadn't anticipated, and there's a new work opportunity, whether that's a gig or that's a job. So that's the general set of steps that we suggest people go through. Now, when you're doing creative work, and especially you're trying to build out that portfolio, that actually is an iterative process that is best done as a team sport and potentially in co-creation with people you think of as your future customers. And so what we find is that it can be useful to envision processes, to work with customers where you think you see a problem that they're experiencing and you come along with potential solutions, but you want to co-create that solution. And at the front end, maybe it's not a great revenue generator, and at the back end, it could be an awesome revenue generator. A lot of it is just, where is the dial on risk? So if you come to somebody, you say, I want you to pay me $1 million and I'll come up with your next great product. Seems like high risk to me. Maybe somebody's going to do that. But if instead you say, listen, I believe that there's this customer, they have this problem, we could solve this together, you've got money, let's put a little bit of money towards at the front end, let's determine if that really is a problem, then on the back end we'll all benefit. That's another way to approach that problem solving and collaborative sequence.
100%, 100%. Co-creation is definitely the best tool that we have available to us. It gives us this opportunity to experiment, to connect with like-minded individuals, to explore our own abilities, and maybe most importantly, adds a sense of accountability. At least it does for me. In some ways, that's what these podcasts are all about. I mean, I'm accountable to the people that listen to this every single week. And every week I promise that there's going to be something. So I better go out, listen, and learn about the world. Since you're super connected to the corporate world, I'm curious, do you think that the Great Reset has changed the level of risk that a company is willing to take in the co-creation process? Do you think they've learned any interesting lessons, and how are they going to adapt to it moving forward?
I hope going to be one of the lessons from the Great Reset is that the way that companies have defined work roles, the ways that companies have tried to source workers, there's so many of these systems that we inherited when we shifted from an agricultural model to an industrial model, right? So on a farm, people kind of did whatever they could do. Like, oh, you know how to repair a tractor? Sure, repair the tractor. Didn't happen in factories. No, actually, you had very defined roles and had to do things at scale. And so in the shift to factories, we created these things called hierarchies and job roles. And we built structure so that we could scale. And in this world, none of those things are necessarily requirements. We actually can scale without having really, really strictly defined work roles, without having people being round pegs that have to be shoved into round slots. And so this is what I hope comes out of it, is that companies will think very, very differently about the kinds of workers that they need. They actually will have a portfolio of workers. They'll have a range of different work contexts, not just traditional employees, but contractors, gig workers, cloud workers, creatives, creative teams. They leverage their customers to help them design new products. They work in their communities. That portfolio of workers creates what I call the network. The old model of an organization is a box. There's abundance outside the box, lots of people that want jobs, and there's scarcity inside the box. But in an abundant world where there's all these skills, all these talented people that can solve so many of the problems of your organization, you need to run yourself like a network. You need to look like that broad, interconnected node graph that is able to continue to leverage human skills to be able to solve the problems of today and tomorrow. And so there are organizations that are increasingly crafting themselves along those lines. What's really important is to understand yourself as a problem solver, to understand the kinds of problems that an organization that you are targeting, that you want to approach, that you want to work for, really deeply understand the problems that they're trying to solve for their customers and other constituents, and to show them how you are the one who is not going to create problems by coming in. You're going to solve those problems, and you can do it extremely effectively. That's how you differentiate yourself. And I don't care what the organization does. That is the key mindset to be able to articulate your skill set.
We always hear about how important networking is in any business solution. The whole saying of who you know versus what you know being the most important thing sounds like it'll become a lot more important in your future. What would you say, though, to someone who doesn't really feel like they're a good networker, or that just doesn't fit in with the cool kids in the job market, or don't fit into the box?
We as humans don't know our own skills. I always show a picture of an iceberg, and there's a peculiar aspect of our neurology where if we have solved a problem already, we tend to discount the value of that skill down to zero. We discount what we've achieved, and we think everybody else could do it. One of my favorite stories, Heidi and I, who are business partners, we did a workshop for youth from native New Zealand Maori kids, and we were doing a skills workshop. And of course, all of us know from being teenagers, there's only two kinds of teenagers. There's the teenagers who think they know everything, and the teenagers who think they know nothing. There's nothing in between. So this was unfortunately a young woman who thought she knew nothing. Like she thought she had no skills. And Heidi's working with her, and she said, well, okay, so you don't like the word skills. Okay, tell me something you did that you really enjoyed doing. And she said, well, I have this friend, and she lives on this island off the coast of New Zealand, and I wanted to go visit her, but my parents wouldn't pay for it. So I built a boat. And I just like, you did what? I built a boat. And she asked the question that I would have asked, which is, how? Now, in every language in the world, there's some equivalent that you can translate. But in English, of course, when it's a teenager talking to an adult and they say something they think is stupid, we translate it to duh. So the response was, duh, I cut down a tree, I hollowed it out, I put resin on it. And then, of course, the next question, which is the one I would have asked, is, did it float? Duh. Of course it floated. I mean, can't everybody do that? Well, we had some kids from an inner city project in Oakland who were there too, and they looked at her like she was a goddess. I mean, these kids wouldn't even know what tree you would cut down in the first place, right? They don't see a lot of trees. But to her, this was doesn't everybody know how to build a boat? And so this is who we are as humans. The part of the iceberg that's above the waterline is actually pretty small. But we've got all these other skills that we as humans have exhibited, and we don't know. And so one of the first things I say is, as an organization, you want to encourage people within the organization to know their own skills, to be able to continually codify that, because step two is you as an organizational leader, you have an iceberg of human capacity. That is, you only see what you hired them for. You only know what they put in their resume. And maybe you don't even know that because you only know the tasks you put in front of them to solve. And so let's say that you've got somebody that is sweeping floors for you, and they used to be a doctor in their home country. They became a refugee. They came to the US. They couldn't work as a doctor, and all they're doing is sweeping floors. And now you're going to envision your next new product, which is going to be creating something that's going to be helping doctors' offices to be as antiseptic as possible post-COVID. Wouldn't you want to know you had a doctor sweeping your floors? So you as a leader don't know the iceberg in your organization. There's a great book that's called The Inside Gig by my friend Kelly Stephen Waste that's just come out. And she's a CHRO who also has a company that is focused on helping companies to be able to understand the skill set they have inside their organization. You have a portfolio of workers and you don't even know what's in the portfolio. You have all these assets that are just sitting there on the shelf that you are not helping to optimize.
I love that iceberg analogy. Oh man, I got all sorts of visuals running through my head right now. You're totally right. When I think about the things that I do naturally, I don't really value them. And so I'm just like, okay, yeah, but no one would pay for that or whatever. And I just move on and get on with my day. And it's only when I try to teach someone what I do that I actually realize like, oh, there are so many more steps to this than I realized. And then it just gets really complicated. I want to just end on the really, really big picture. So we look towards the future, 2050 coming up. We have these climate goals that we're definitely not going to hit. We have, polarizations of the rich and the poor. We have rising trade war tensions between the East and the West. We have the melting of the polar ice caps, which are opening up new territorial wars between Russia and China.
You paint a really bleak future, Ben. That's
Right. Well, this is me coming at it from an environmental perspective and feeling like, man, we have a problem here. And I just wanted to know, as a futurist, what do you see when you peer into the future? Are you optimistic? How do you think we're going to get through all of it?
So I think of myself as a possibilist. I don't think of myself as a futurist. There's three different scenarios. There's a future of work where robots and software take all our jobs, the polar ice caps melt, the seas rise, dystopia takes over. I call that the Elysium scenario from the movie, where basically all the rich people go and live on a satellite above the earth and leave all us poor people behind. So that's scenario number one. Scenario number two, everything from exponential technologies to new understanding of the way our human brains work to all these opportunities to be able to create massive, widespread, benevolent future all happen, and everybody's doing great. So that's future number two. Future number three, there's a whole bunch of robots and software. There's a whole bunch of opportunity, and we got the matching process wrong. That is, there's a lot of people out of work. There's a lot of work demand. There's a lot of money to be made, but we left all the fractures in the system that guarantee that it's going to split. I've written a series of papers from education to our economy. So my thesis is that the internet evaporates the middle. That is, the flywheel effects of technology and financialization, these flywheel effects where people with assets, people with money, organizations with dominant market shares tend to keep them. And people at the base of the pyramid tend to have downward compression on wages, less access to education and work, and so on. And you see this again and again. There's one Amazon, one Facebook, one eBay, one, you name it. There's one called Shark at the top, and there's a whole bunch of sea turtles at the bottom. They're all trying to crawl up the beach and create new value, but there's a massive gaping space in the middle. And so that's future number three, is that there's tremendous opportunity, but it's for a small number of people and organizations, and there's a lot less opportunity at the base of the pyramid. So as a possibilist, how do you change these things? Well, I talk about sort of four domains: individuals, organizations, communities, and countries. What do you want as an individual? You want to be able to find or create meaningful, well-paid work today and tomorrow. There's lots of other things you want in life, but if everybody on the planet could find or create meaningful, well-paid work today and tomorrow, we'd be okay. For an organization, you want the talented people that can help you to solve problems today and tomorrow, right? If you don't have them, sure, you could run on robots and software, but you're always going to need talented people. So that's what a lot of organizations want. Communities want to be ecosystems in which everybody can thrive. And then finally, at countries, when I sit down with the Minister of Labor, the Minister of Education for Brazil or Luxembourg or Canada, they want to be inclusive economies. So the reason I talk about those sort of 4 levels is you can decide where you need to play. Like if you just want to focus on yourself as an individual, how do you develop pace? How do you continually develop the kind of agency that allows you to find or create meaningful, well-paid work? If there's a set of people, a population you care about, how do you help them to do that, right? And maybe that's anchored in a community. For an organization, how are you going to have those talented people? If you don't change the way you hire, you don't develop the iceberg and understand the talents inside the organization, then you're not going to have that positive future. So take action. And especially as we have 25, 30, 35 million people unemployed in the US, you better build more inclusive hiring processes so you're not going to have those talented people. Communities, community leaders, whatever you think of as the community where you show up, you need to be more engaged. How many people have I talked to through Zoom calls who say they get out and they walk in their neighborhoods and see things they've never seen before? Take that time and energy to engage in your communities and to help them to be thriving ecosystems. And then finally, at the country level, you're not completely segmented from that future. You can vote. You can have an opinion about what a positive future looks like. We have millions of people in the United States and around the world who have all made a statement about one aspect of a positive future and getting out to walk for Black Lives Matter. And so you actually have a role. You have a role at any one or all of those layers. You can change at the micro level. You can change at the macro level. You got to choose. And then what you can do is you can build that more benevolent future. You don't have to wait for robots and software to take all the jobs. You don't have to wait for the polar ice caps to melt. Instead, what you do is you have agency. You take action on the things that you think most need to happen. And I guarantee that that will roll up to the macro level. And by the way, action is not simply just posting something on social media. That is not agency. Okay, just want to say it's not, it's fun, it's useful, it's valuable. If all you did is post some little hashtag support for something, that's not agency. I'm sorry. Got to do more. Got to do more.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So great. I love that I asked a huge futurist question and you just brought it straight down to the present, because that's how the future is built after all, with the actions of the present. And I think that's really powerful. It's all about the process of leaning in and picking one thing that you care about and just starting to do the work. Yeah, I spent my last week feeling extremely uncomfortable because of the whole Black Lives Matter movement and those racial discussions, because I know that it's a topic that I should lean into more, but I just don't know how to. And for a while, that just really bothered me, the fact that I felt guilty and uncomfortable, and until I realized that it was actually a really good thing that I felt guilty and uncomfortable. I mean, it was because of my guilt and discomfort that led to new conversations, new readings, new questions. And that's really the first step. That's progress, right? And ultimately, it's all about progress, because change isn't really a destination. So yeah, Gary, thank you so much for your time. Before ending, I want to ask, how should people find out more about what you do? And if they want to go deeper into your mind, where should they go?
Well, I don't know if going deeper into my mind is an activity I would recommend, but if you want to learn more about any of these sort of aspects of work and learning in organizations, then I post regularly on LinkedIn. That's sort of my feed. So please, people can follow me there. I've got 9 courses on LinkedIn Learning with about 330,000 students. So everything from learning agility to the new rules of work. And that could be very helpful to people who want to sort of walk through some steps in understanding some of these aspects. And then on my website, gbolles.com, I always post lots of links to all the articles that I've written, the videos that I record, the talks that I do. So those are places to explore more.
Cool. Thank you so much for your time, man. That was really, really insightful. I really appreciate it.
That was fun for me.
So there you have it, guys. That was Gary Bolles. That's Bolles. And if you Google his name, you'll find an absolute wealth of information out there on the topic. If you've enjoyed this podcast, take the time to send it to one friend that you think would enjoy it too. Next week, we have Sophie Otiende, a human trafficking survivor and advocate all the way from Kenya, who will come in and share her perspective on how justice works, what ethical storytelling means to her, and the way she measures impact when fighting against a massive system of corruption. If you want to stalk her before the episode, you can check her out at sophieotiende.com. That's Otiende. All right, that's all for today, folks. Thanks for tuning in and stay inspired because impact is everywhere.